This is where the story begins. Once upon a time, there was a noble family named Winthrop that made a lot of money renting their land to a popular fertility cult, Cantanu, that conducted business on their property. The cult had an unbelievably powerful fertility idol made of blue steel. It was so powerful that the woman didn't even need a man to become pregnant. Pregnancy occurred immediately after the ceremony, even if she had not recently been with a man. The idol was so powerful, in fact, that it was reported it could even turn a man into a child-bearing woman, which was why men would even look at the idol. But the high priestess of the cult got angry one day, because some of the women, after being blessed with a child, ended up killing their child, or selling it at the market, because motherhood turned out to be harder than they expected. So the priestess melted the idol down into a bed of nails. Any woman wishing to become a mother had to spend a night sleeping on the bed of nails to prove she knew and was ready to deal with the pain of motherhood. The test was terrible, for when the nails bit into flesh the pain was excruciating, but the piercing and the blood was necessary to become pregnant. But raising the difficulty bar to this level greatly degraded the cult's popularity, and after the death of the high priestess, the cult all but disbanded, leaving the landlords out of what had been their greatest source of income. It was in this period of decline that Viscount Winthrop, the heir of the family estate, grew up and came of age. Close neighbours of the Winthrop family were the Sterlings, a noble family that had a tremendous amount of wealth due to the textile trade, and their wealth only increased with time. Alistair Sterling was the same age as Viscount, and the two grew up passive rivals of sorts, one upping each other whenever possible. But the decline of the House of Winthrop often put Viscount at a disadvantage to his well-funded peer, and this disparity only got worse with time. Viscount came of age with Alistair getting the best of him in nearly every subject due to his family's endless resources, and Alistair never passed up a chance to snark and verbally humiliate Viscount whenever he could. To make matters worse, he was classically trained by the legendary swordsman Nominor, who lived comfortably on his family's land. So the few attempts Viscount made to salvage his honour always ended in further humiliation. But the humiliation reached its peak when, due to rising debt, the Winthrop family bargained to give their youngest daughter, Viscount's sister, to Alistair as his wife. Alistair was fond of telling Viscount how his sister tries to skirt her wifely duties, but the law is the law, which meant he expected his rights as husband each and every night, and sometimes in the morning should the mood strike him. Alistair enjoyed watching Viscount tense at his casual, tasteless remarks, but refrained from responding because there was nothing he could do about it. He was bested at every turn by Alistair, and as long as Viscount was in earshot, Alistair would remind him of this poignantly. To make this unfortunate situation worse, Viscount's sister Penelope had not become pregnant after 3 years of marriage, giving Alistair just another line of insults to torment Viscount with. And even further, it prompted Alistair to begin coveting the one thing Viscount's family had that his didn't: the Cantanu fertility cult temple. Specifically the bed of nails now housed in the temple. Tasking his young wife to spend a night on the nails was delightful to Alistair, so he began a passive-aggressive verbal campaign to get Viscount to agree to sell him the temple and its items. Viscount wasn't against the idea, seeing an opportunity to get out of the large amount of debt his family had incurred, but Alistair hated both the idea of paying so much for the temple and the idea of the Viscount's being out of debt. So he refused Viscount's offer, but continued his comment campaign, assuming Viscount as always would break to either his relentless peer pressure or his family's increasingly crippling debt. But Viscount wouldn't budge, causing Alistair to ratchet up the pressure and personal insults against Viscount. But the final straw was when Alistair bought the Winthrop's debt and increased the interest rate to a level certain to bankrupt the House of Winthrop. What was even worse was he overpaid for the debt note, showing this wasn't even a rational business decision, but an action of spite. But Viscount's response surprised Alistair, for Viscount challenged Alistair to a duel. The desperate move of a cornered dog, Alistair thought, but his pride and sword skill would not allow him to refuse this very public challenge. Plus, the stakes in Viscount's demand were surprising. He first demanded that if he win, his debt would be forgiven, which was expected. But his second demand was that he be given the eldest daughter of the Sterling family, which meant Alistair's sister. Alistair laughed at the demand, knowing it was revenge for what he'd been doing to Viscount's sister, and the knowledge his taunts had obviously been taking their toll made him grin. In return, if Viscount lost, his entire family estate would pass to the Sterlings, and if he, Viscount, survived the duel, he would become a servant of the House of Sterling. The idea of such a crushing end to the Winthrops was delightful to Alistair, so accepting this desperate challenge was swift and emphatic. The duel was to take place a year from the date of the challenge, just at the point of debt default the Viscounts would enter into in the spring. One last year of freedom, Alistair speculated, was the reason behind the lengthy delay. Thoughts of the endless torments he could inflict at his leisure danced around in Alistair's head, making him almost drunk with gleeful anticipation. Only the small hurdle was this duel he had to win, but it was just a formality. Alistair had bested Viscount with the sword on multiple occasions, so one last time wasn't considered a problem. Still, Alistair found himself slightly regretting expelling his former swordmaster off his property, for now a brush-up in training would be useful. Nevertheless, he wasn't worried. The Winthrops could never afford private training, which was why Viscount was never a match for Alistair. Alistair grinned, knowing Viscount's normal, clumsy, wild chopping would be all he had to deal with. The day of the duel, Alistair strolled into the courtyard with a grin, fashionably late. The thought of making them think he might not show only to dash their hopes with just his entry was delightful. His eyes scanned the small crowd in front of him, eager to take in the despondent look Viscount was certain to be wearing, but recognizing an unexpected face, his gaze landed on the square, solemn head of his former swordmaster. "Nomina, didn't expect to see you here for this. So good you could make it," Alistair remarked with a head tilt and a forced smile. One could visibly see Alistair's mind calculating what Nominor's presence on the opposite side with Viscount could mean. His gaze then found Viscount. Alistair studied his face and found no sign of despondence or resignation. He then looked for anger, hatred, or gestures of exaggerated readiness that is common to a fighter attempting to bolster his chances as an underdog. No, it was controlled determination, and for the first time in quite some time, Alistair felt a pang of fear that he possibly took this duel too lightly. "Feeling well today?" Alistair asked Viscount, looking for a break in his expression. Viscount simply nodded. "Good," Alistair responded loudly, feigning a solid, careless confidence. "Let's get this over with. I've given you more than adequate time to prepare, have I not?" Without any further fanfare, the two drew swords and cautiously met in the open court. Viscount swung first as expected, but his attack was controlled. Even baiting, Alistair sensed. Alistair returned with a probing attack of his own, hoping to bait an overextended counter-attack. But Viscount's counter was controlled, and he immediately returned to a perfect stance. "Been training my opponent, I see," Alistair called out to Nomina, letting him know he recognized his work and took offense to him having aided Viscount. "Yes, the Winthrops have been kind this past year." Nominor returned, reminding him why the two were no longer together. His comment also informed Alistair that Viscount had been in camp for a full year. Knowing this information would unsettle Alistair's nerves. Alistair turned up the pace, but not wildly. He was trained, and his trained focus kicked in. Back and forth the two stalked with cautious swings and moments of frantic footwork. In a flash, the two swung simultaneously, but only Viscount's sword connected, biting into Alistair's forearm, causing him to fall to the ground and drop his sword. Immediately Viscount leapt forward to secure his victory, and Alistair cried out, "Mercy!" with outstretched palm. Viscount stopped for a moment, but then drew back and pitilessly drove his sword through Alistair's chest. The expression of shock dominated Alistair's face as he looked into Viscount's eyes, not having expected the merciless return. The shock was replaced by imminent death, as he looked down at the sword being pulled from his chest. The wound might as well have been directly in his heart, and Alistair knew there was no chance of survival. He waited on the ground in extreme pain, anticipating the black of death at any moment. But death seemed to be taking its time, and Alistair could hear a voice above him. Hey! 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 Here! He heard Viscount snapping his fingers above him, trying to get his attention. He struggled to focus. Hey! Viscount repeated. You're not going to die. The last statement caught all of Alistair's attention, and he focused with all the will he could muster. Hurts, don't it? Viscount gloated over him. Look at this, he continued, holding up his sword for Alistair to see. See that blue steel? Recognize that? You know what that is? The steel of the Cantanugan nails. Made a nice sword, don't you think? Viscount gazed down at Alistair, who was visibly trying to understand what was going on. He couldn't understand the casual, unworried, patronizing look Viscount was now giving him, and how his demeanor insinuated he was mistaken in his expectation of death. Viscount snapped a couple times again, refocusing Alistair's attention. Looks like life's about to change, my dear, Viscount remarked with a haughty smirk. I'll give you this week off to recover and acclimate, but after that, well, as you said, law's the law. He finished with a mocking, sympathetic pat on Alistair's leg. With a pleased look, he sprung up and casually strode away, leaving Alistair still writhing in pain and desperately trying to figure out what was going on. But the enigma of what had happened only lasted one night, for Alistair awoke the next morning with developing breasts and a slimmer figure. Although he was relieved to be alive, the reality of what had happened and what was about to happen was beginning to set in. But the devastation of what had just occurred reached its climax when word of his upcoming marriage ceremony reached his ears, causing him to faint at the realization Viscount's duel wager was nothing less than a genius life sentence of daily humiliation. And Viscount returned Alistair's, now Alisty's, crude treatment of his sister sevenfold, often remarking, "The law's the law," before bed every night.